On an ordinary summer day, a group of people gathers for a picnic by the river, and the atmosphere is one of laughter and simple solemnity. Suddenly, someone spots a small boat stranded on the shore, abandoned and drifting, motionless as if it had been left in a hurry or by some unexplained urgency. The group's natural curiosity leads them to it to check for any lost luggage or an injured animal that might need help. But when they lift the boat's tarp and look inside, they find a scene that paralyzes them immediately. A body in an advanced state of decomposition that produces a shock beyond mere physical revulsion and settles like an unanswered question. They then contact the police and, shortly after, the local precinct chief, John Hawkins, appears at the scene to coordinate the first steps and keep calm while the area is secured. Forensic examiner Connie accompanies him and describes the corpse's condition in clinical terms and with a professional disappointment that does not hide the discomfort. She explains that the absence of bone structures is profound and unexpected, that the body's form is so altered that only soft tissues remain, in patterns that defy simple explanations, and that something in that organism suggests more than the action of time or common predators. Among the details Connie collects as evidence is a curious insect, a wasp found inside the remains. Jacob Redgrave, the assigned coroner, preserves the insect in a jar for analysis, because it could be the microscopic clue that links biology and circumstance. John, perceiving the need to preserve any fragment of evidence, asks that the jar be kept in a secure condition, aware that small investigations often point to larger truths. The victim's identity is soon discovered through the crushed belongings at the bottom of the boat. A wallet with a name and some documents that put a human face behind the found body. It was Cole Parsons, a scientist who had arrived in Lone Crow the previous year, and who had been noticed by some locals for his reclusiveness by the lake, living in an isolated cabin in the woods. For some people, that choice seemed to speak of a search for silence and solitary work. For others, it suggested a hermit with secrets. The fact that Cole lived there gives John a clear lead for the next step: visit the cabin in the forest to try to understand what happened. While arranging this trip, we are introduced to Meg Fulbright, a woman who worked with the police as a wilderness guide, who knows the woods and can read tracks and trails. Moreover, she was once John's partner, a past that adds subtext to the investigation, because the former romance ended when John expressed plans to leave Lone Crow to try life in the city, a desire for change that collided with Meg's wish to remain connected to nature. That divergence separated them, leaving memories and perhaps a thread of affection that still persists. Interestingly, Meg also had a previous relationship with Jacob, a tangle that creates tension and allows for small sparks of resentment and recollection when the three gather for the mission, because in small communities, lives intertwine in ways that do not exist in big cities. When John summons Meg and Jacob to accompany him to the cabin, they accept despite the foreboding in the air, each carrying their own mix of caution and need to know. Before they depart, Connie calls with unsettling news about the wasp in the jar. The insect had been collected lifeless the previous night, but now appears alive, which suggests a phenomenon that escapes routine forensic explanation and could indicate an external, chemical, or physical influence. Connie also reveals personal details that entwine the story further. Cole had a daughter who disappeared a year ago and was never found, and his wife, Linda, suffered a mental collapse and spent months hospitalized, blaming her husband for the disappearance. At the end of the afternoon, John, Meg, and Jacob set out to reach Parsons' property. The path narrows and the forest seems closed, as if wanting to keep what it conceals. Upon arriving at the cabin, they are surprised by a sight that contrasts with the image Meg had of a welcoming place. The house is unbalanced, furniture overturned, objects scattered as if someone had left in haste or as if there had been a struggle. Any sense of former home seems dissipated. John decides to inspect the interior first alone, while the others wait outside, an action that mixes prudence with awareness of professional hierarchies. Upon entering, he sharpens his senses to details that speak of recent human presence and a restlessness that exceeds mere disorder. The ceiling moves in a strange way, as if something behind it were breathing or pronouncing itself in silence. The door he found locked earlier reveals itself open without being forced, a sign that someone manipulates the space and walks through it with disquieting freedom. When the three reunite inside the house, The sense that something is wrong grows, reinforced by noises echoing through the building and by an energy that cannot be explained. More disconcertingly, the lights turn on by themselves, leaving the house with an air of surveillance or theatricality. The discovery of a staircase leading to the basement introduces the element that will soon hook them deeper into the enigma. Below, buried under smells of damp and metal, is a complex machine, an apparatus of industrial aspect that, in many points, resembles laboratory equipment, but also something improvised and potentially dangerous. Thick wires run up toward the attic. Panels with records and tubes speak of concentrated energy. At first glance, John and Meg cannot fully interpret its purpose. They only sense that the artifact is the core of something larger, perhaps the locus of the experiments Cole had been conducting, and that now have visible and inexpressible consequences. As they search the walls of the locked room, they discover drawings and notes that dismantle the idea of clean, austere research. The scribbles mix equations and technical diagrams with oddly ritualistic symbols, images that seem to combine science and belief, as if a thin line between method and fervor had been broken. This mixture creates particular discomfort in Linda, when she later confesses that her husband changed gradually and became interested in ideas that frightened her, something that suggests the experiment's character was not only technical, but also obsessive. While they debate the equipment's nature, an unusually large fly bites Jacob on the face, an attack that leaves him stunned and that may be only a natural coincidence. However, as the investigation progresses, the pattern of coincidences ceases to be casual. Electromagnetic interference coming from the attic cuts communications, hindering John from maintaining contact with Connie, which increases isolation and makes decisions rely on what they can see and feel there, in that place that no longer resembles a home. The personal tensions between Jacob and Meg, remnants of past affections, create sparks that make the night harder, because beyond the explicit danger, each brings their burden of memories that obscure clarity. When they decide to sleep in the cabin due to the hour and distance, they feel pressed by the presence of something that refuses to be domesticated. Meg insists on having a room to herself, a need that mixes autonomy and an instinct to protect herself from the collective. This separation creates a risk that soon proves narratively salutary, for in the following hours, Jacob falls ill rapidly. The condition leaves him confused and disconnected, with symptoms that do not align with common illnesses. When an external noise makes them run outside, they are met by Linda holding a shotgun. The scene gains human and inevitable dimension, because Linda arrived searching for her husband without knowing what she would find. Upon discovering that the police are present and that her husband was declared dead, she reacts first with resistance, and then with a surrender that mixes relief and rancor, recalling in biting words the past year of loss and madness. While they talk, Meg goes down to the basement to try to restart the machine, hoping to restore power and prevent something electronic from keeping an anomaly active. In that moment, we are shown a small, silent figure following her among shadows, a child that exists as possibility and memory. When Meg turns, she finds a doll which she takes, feeling an emotional weight that speaks of ties and absences. This doll will later function as a documentary thread for what happened, because objects carry memory even when their origin is obscured by fear. Searching for Jacob, John climbs to the attic and finds him trapped to the machine as if some force had immobilized him. Pulling him out, they notice his mind seems displaced, that parts of his memory were erased, and that the body shows subtle and disturbing transformation, alterations that will intensify over time if the machine remains active. Linda, hearing the voice she believes to be her daughter's, feels a reopened wound that leads her to act with both desperation and hope, because the prospect of finding the child alive tears her reason apart. In those hours, the investigation ceases to be mere work and becomes a personal urgency for each of those involved. When they examine a password-locked laptop, John and Linda realize there are digital records that may explain the course of the experiments. But before they can access them, they see Cole standing outside as if nothing had happened, a man returning from supposed death with a calm that unsettles. Linda reacts violently, striking the face of the one who was her spouse, a blow that translates years of fear and betrayal. Cole accepts the assault without resistance, which increases the feeling that his personality underwent a deep change. perhaps because of the very apparatus he built. He avoids answering direct questions about the equipment, preferring enigmas and empty jokes, behavior that fuels suspicion and anger. At this point, Connie at the station observes the wasp reappearing and multiplying in forms that defy natural explanation, and she understands there is a link between the biological anomaly and the machine, a probable multiplier of life or of an effect that contaminates. When Jacob begins to show clear and rapid bodily changes, the team recognizes that this is not merely psychological. Nails alter, structures reorganize, and the appearance becomes progressively different, indicating direct interaction between organism and energy field or experimental agent. Faced with this, John loses patience with Cole's evasions. In a burst of physical authority, he knocks him down and handcuffs him to prevent further sinister actions. The group decides to search a nearby camp in hopes of finding escape routes and evidence. Upon arriving, they find equipment and supplies and a scene of bodies already in advanced decomposition and mutilation. A revelation that shocks and accelerates their plan because they understand there were previous victims and that the experiment's reach is greater than imagined. The presence of horror transforms the mission into a containment operation, demanding shutting down the device or destroying whatever is necessary to interrupt the spread. At that moment, Meg reveals to John in a fragile, intimate moment that she is pregnant, news that mixes hope and fear. For a new life announces itself amid ruins and decisions of extreme risk. Returning to the cabin, Linda, alone with Cole, manages to unlock the laptop with an intimate password and finds footage that confirms the worst hypothesis. Videos and notes showing that Cole had been using the machine to alter organisms, that previous experiments transformed people into restless versions of themselves, and that, brutally and perhaps irreversibly, he sacrificed his own daughter to test limits that should not be tested. The revelation throws Linda into a spiral of despair and rage. When John and Meg return, they find Jacob in a state of bodily rupture and, in a confrontation mixing survival and panic, a creature produced by that transformation bursts from Jacob's body and attacks. In the confusion, Meg intervenes with a shot and neutralizes the threat. Realizing the machine is the epicenter of the calamities, John decides to destroy it before the phenomenon spreads. He instructs Meg to leave the area and begins preparing an improvised plan with gasoline and explosives that, if successful, would end the anomaly. Linda, seized by a devastating impulse, goes to the basement and, in front of the machine, sees an image she interprets as her daughter. In a mix of crazed love and pain, she enters the apparatus, becoming another victim of what she called research. The scene is tragic and irreparable because the desire to recover what was lost consoles a decision that ends destroyed. As mutated victims begin to emerge from the woods and converge on the cabin, Meg fires to contain the advance and protect the escape route. But the attackers' number and persistence show that the effect's dispersion may already have coincided with the spread of a biological or energetic problem. In the attic, John confronts Cole in a fight that is less heroic than necessary, a combat in which blows serve as distraction until John manages to neutralize the aggressor definitively and set the structure on fire to prevent further proliferation. The extreme action provokes an explosion and becomes a sacrifice because John cannot escape. The house becomes flame and ruin while Meg flees, carrying memories and wounds, surviving but marked by the loss and the weight of a choice that saved many at the cost of a life she loved. The story advances 8 months and shows Meg again in a domestic setting, pregnant and caring for the life insisted on being born. She receives from forensic examiner Connie some belongings that recall John and, in a farewell ritual mixing pain and reverence, places the objects in the flame to burn memories that hurt too much to remain intact. Soon after, however, we see the final scene that alters the reading of everything that happened. A decomposed and ethereal body lying under a tree in the woods. Meg's physical presence no longer corresponds to what she once was, indicating that the transformation that began in the cabin continued, that altered life forms now walk beneath the surface of what is understood as humanity. The revelation that the child she expects may carry traces of this change leaves the conclusion suspended, between the relief of an apparent end and the fear of a new generation that may be born with something that does not fit the previous world.